Be Me Wesley, 28, landscaper, dirt under the nails, own little crew, honest money in the bank. Girlfriend of almost 2 years, Sloan, 27, works in marketing. 2 years together, and I had still never met her parents. Not because they lived on the other side of the country, they lived 40 minutes away. I had never met them because, according to Sloan, I wasn't ready yet. That sentence should have been my first warning. Instead, I treated it like a project I could finish if I just worked hard enough. Spoiler, the project never had a finish line. Let me back up and tell it from the start, because the ending only lands right if you see how slow it all built. Sloan and I met through a job. Her company hired my crew to redo the courtyard outside their office. Long planters, a few ornamental grasses, a little water feature that leaked for a week until I tracked down the bad fitting. She came out most afternoons with her coffee and watched us work. We got to talking on the third or fourth day. She was sharp, quick with a joke, had this way of making you feel like the most interesting guy in the room. I asked her out before the last of the mulch went down. The first few months were good. Really good, honestly. She liked that I worked with my hands. There was a night early on when my truck broke down in the rain, and I fixed the belt myself on the shoulder of the road. Showed up to her place soaked and greasy, and she thought that was the best thing she'd ever seen. Told her friends I was her rugged one, whatever that was supposed to mean. Introduced me around like a prize at the start. I met the whole friend group inside the first 2 months. Met her co-workers at some rooftop thing. Met her sister once, briefly at a coffee shop, and that went fine. So, it wasn't like she kept me hidden from everyone. Just the 2 people at the top of the chart. Then somewhere around the 6-month mark, the meeting the parents thing came up, and the temperature changed. I brought it up easy, no pressure behind it. Said I'd love to meet the people who raised her. She smiled, but it was tight around the edges, and she said her dad was particular, said her mom was refined, said we'd get there when the timing felt right. Fine, no rush. I'm a patient guy, and I meant it. A month or so later, I asked again, and this time there were conditions. Not phrased as conditions, of course. Phrased as helpful little suggestions, the way people dress up a no, so it sounds like a yes with homework stapled to it. My dad really respects ambition, she told me. Maybe when the business is a bit more established. Now here's the thing that should have ended it right there. My business was already established. 2 trucks, a steady client list, money coming in every single week, invoices paid on time. But I wanted to make her happy, so I swallowed it and turned it into a goal, picked up a second crew, started chasing the bigger commercial contracts I'd been turning down for years. Worked Saturdays. I had no real reason to work. Inside of a few months, I'd nearly doubled what I was pulling in. Told Sloan, proud as anything, fully expecting her to finally say the timing was right. She said, "That's a good start. A good start." By the end of the 2 years, I understood that everything with her was a good start, and nothing was ever the finish. I even remember the day I hit a number I was genuinely proud of. A big contract with a property management company that locked in steady work for the whole year. Came home practically buzzing to tell her. She asked if it meant I'd finally hire someone to do the actual digging so I could manage instead of labor. As if the labor was a phase I was supposed to grow out of. As if the part of the job I liked most was the embarrassing part I needed to hide behind a desk. I stopped bringing home the wins after a while. They never landed as wins with her, just as the next rung she'd point at higher up. The close came next. We were getting ready for a dinner with her coworkers, and I came out in clean jeans and a decent shirt. She looked at me the way you look at a scuff on a new floor. "You're not planning to wear that around my parents, right?" Turned out my whole wardrobe was a liability. Too much work in it, too many boots, too many shirts with the crew logo stitched on the chest. "My mom notices these things," she said, like her mom was a judge and I was already in the dock. So I let her drag me shopping, dropped a real chunk of money on clothes I'd wear maybe twice a year. Button-downs, a couple pairs of loafers, a jacket that itched at the collar and never once stopped. Stood in the fitting room mirror, feeling like a mannequin somebody had propped up and walked away from. She said, "I cleaned up okay." Not good, okay. Let me be clear about one thing here, because it matters to the rest of this. I wasn't some slob she was heroically rescuing from myself. I shower. I own nice things. I know which fork goes where, and I can hold a conversation with anybody. But every single time I cleared one bar, another one showed up a little higher up the wall. It was like reaching for a shelf that slides up an inch the second your fingers brush the edge of it. After the wardrobe came the coaching on how I talked. We'd be out somewhere, and she'd cut in the moment I mentioned work. "He does a lot more than gardening," she'd say to the table, laughing, but the laugh always had an apology folded into it. Later, in the car, she'd tell me I needed more range, said I leaned on lawns and irrigation too heavily, said her parents were cultured, and I ought to have something to bring to the table. So I started reading up on things I didn't care about just to keep a few opinions in my back pocket. Practice sounding interested in stuff that put me to sleep. Felt like I was assembling a fake version of myself to hand over to two people I'd never once laid eyes on. That's the detail that really gets me now, looking back on it. I didn't even know what her parents looked like. No photo, not a single one in 2 years. Never told me their first names either, now that I sit and think about it. Just my dad and my mom. These two figures parked up on a shelf that I had to somehow qualify to reach. There was a stretch where the conditions started coming faster. One week it was that I should trade the work truck for something nicer to drive to their place, as if a man showing up in the vehicle he earns his living in was some kind of insult. Another time she wanted me to take a wine thing with her, a tasting class, so I'd have something to talk about with her father. Went to 2 of them, sat there swirling glasses and nodding along. Couldn't tell you a single thing I learned, except that the whole exercise felt like cramming for a test that kept getting postponed. The comparison started creeping in around then too. One of her friends had a boyfriend who did something in an office, finance, or consulting, the kind of job where nobody can explain what he actually does all day. Sloan brought him up more than once, mentioned how his parents adored her friend, how he'd met them within a couple of months, how smooth the whole thing had gone. Never said the quiet part out loud, but it hung there in the room anyway. He wore the right clothes and worked the right kind of soft indoor job, so he sailed straight through. I dug in the dirt for a living, so I got the 2-year obstacle course. There was a wedding somewhere in the middle of all this too. One of her college friends getting married, big fancy affair, and Sloan spent a week fretting over what she'd tell people I did when they asked. Landed on introducing me as someone who has his own business, full stop, and steering the conversation away fast if anybody pushed for details. I stood at that reception in the itchy jacket, watching her manage the story of me, like it was a problem account she'd been assigned at work. Smiled through it, told myself it was just the wedding making her tense. More excuses. I had a whole warehouse of them by that point. My buddy called the whole thing early. We were grabbing food after a long install, both of us covered in dust, and I was walking him through the newest round of upgrades Sloan wanted out of me. He set his fork down and looked at me flat. Told me she wasn't preparing me to meet her family. She was editing me, said the goalposts were never going to stop sliding because the goalposts weren't the actual point. I got a little defensive, the way you do when somebody says out loud the thing you've been ducking for months. Told him he didn't get it, that every couple compromises, that we loved each other, and this was just her being careful about her family. He shrugged and said, 2 years, man. You've still never met them. Sit with that one. I didn't want to sit with it. So I changed the subject and paid for the food. Around this stretch is when I started clocking the small stuff, the little tells I'd been talking myself out of noticing for months. She had me saved in her phone as W, with a tiny plant emoji next to it. On its own, nothing worth mentioning, but her actual friends were saved with full names and little hearts and inside jokes. When people asked what I did, she kept a whole rotation of ways to soften the answer. He's in landscape design. He runs an outdoor company. He does yards, but the high-end kind. Never once just, he's a landscaper, full stop, said plain and proud. Every version had a small apology baked right into the middle of it. One night, her friend asked me point blank if I was the gardener, and Sloane's face did this thing. A flinch, like the word itself had landed on her instead of on me. She jumped in fast to correct it, said I was basically a designer. It's really more of a creative field, talking over the top of me. The friend nodded politely and the subject changed, and I sat there being edited in real time at my own table. There was another time at a get-together when somebody asked how we met. Sloan told the whole story, except the part where I was there redoing her office courtyard. In her version, we just met through work, clean and vague, the dirt sanded right off it. Small thing. But you notice when the real story of you keeps getting quietly rewritten to be more presentable. I laughed it off in the moment, same as I always did. Told myself she was just stressed, just anxious about her family, just protective of appearances. I made a real career out of excuses back in those days. The question I kept circling was what exactly I was being tested for. Every guy I knew who met his girlfriend's parents just showed up. Handshake, plate of food, a few questions about work and where he's from, done by dessert. Mine had somehow turned into a 2-year certification with no exam date printed anywhere on it. There was one evening that should have been the entire answer, and I walked right past it. Her cousin got engaged, and there was a big announcement dinner with the whole extended family there. I asked, half joking, if this was finally going to be my invite. She told me it wasn't the right setting to introduce me. Went alone, came back and told me all about who was there. Her parents, her grandparents, aunts, uncles, the entire tree. A near stranger who'd been dating her cousin for a few months got a seat at that table. I got a text at 9 o'clock asking whether I'd remembered to feed her cat. I fed the cat. There was a holiday in there too, one of the big ones where the plan had always been vague. Right up until the day before, when it turned out I was spending it on my own because bringing me would raise too many questions. Cooked for one that year and told myself next year would be different. It's honestly a little embarrassing how long I kept telling myself next year would be different. Now here's where the story actually turns, so pay attention to how small the start of it was. There's a woman named Clara I know through work. Nothing romantic, before anybody's mind goes running off in that direction. Her family hired my crew for a big backyard overhaul the year before, and she was the one running point on all of it. We got on the way you get on with a good client. Easy, professional, a few jokes traded back and forth while the sod went down. The job wrapped, and every couple of months after that, she'd text about a plant that was struggling, or a bed that wanted a refresh. Ordinary stuff, nothing to it. Then, one afternoon, she called sounding genuinely wound up. Turned out her dad was about to turn 60. Big family dinner, weeks in the planning, the kind of thing where everybody's watching everybody else, and her plus one had bailed on her at the last minute, with no warning and no apology. She didn't want to walk into her own father's party alone and get grilled all night about being single. Asked if I'd come as a favor. Made it clear, more than once, purely as a friend, nothing at all behind it. Just a familiar face in the empty chair, so her relatives would quit poking at her about her love life. I told her I'd square it with Sloan and let her know by the end of the day. That evening, I laid it out for Sloan exactly as it was. A coworker's father is turning 60. I'm doing her a favor filling an empty seat. I'll be home by 10. You'd expect some questions out of that. You'd expect a flicker of jealousy, or, at the very least, a little curiosity about the whole thing. Nothing. She barely lifted her eyes off her phone, said, "Sure, go, just don't embarrass me somewhere public." Then dropped right back into scrolling like I'd told her the weather report. 2 solid years of me not being ready to meet her parents, and she couldn't scrape together 1 ounce of care about me meeting somebody else's. That gap sat heavy in my chest the whole drive over, even though I didn't have clean words for it yet. The party was at Clara's parents' place. Regular house on a regular street. Nothing fancy about any of it. Cars packed nose to tail in the driveway. Folding tables set up across the backyard. A cooler parked on the patio. I showed up in a clean shirt. Nothing I'd stood in front of the mirror agonizing over. And instead of cut flowers, I brought a little potted olive tree. Figured a man turning 60 could put it in the ground and watch it grow for the next 20 years. Seemed more worth giving than something that wilts by the weekend and gets tossed. Clara's dad opened the door himself. I'll call him Roy, since that's his name, and he told me to use it about 4 seconds after I crossed the threshold. Big guy, gripped like a vice, reading glasses shoved up on his forehead. He looked down at the olive tree, then back up at me, and asked what I did for a living. I told him, landscaping, my own crew, been at it years now. His whole face opened up. Not fake polite, not the thing people do to be nice. The real article. "A man who works with his hands," he said. "Good. Get in here." He took the olive tree off my hands like it was the best gift anybody had brought all day. Called back into the house for his wife to come see it, told her right in front of me that this was a proper gift, something you plant and keep, not another bunch of flowers headed for the trash by Sunday. I'd spent 2 years being told my instincts weren't refined enough for polite company. Walked into a stranger's house, and my instincts were the first thing that got me a compliment. and that was it. That was the entire vetting process, start to finish. No income bracket, no inspection of my shirt, no coaching on how to be more interesting over the appetizers. He simply decided I was welcome and got on with his evening. I want to walk through the next few hours slowly because they cracked something open in me that hasn't really closed back up since. Roy sat me down at the main table, right next to him, not the far end where they usually stick the fill-in guests and the plus ones. Poured me a beer before I'd even thought to ask for one. Then, of all things, the man asked my advice. Said the grass along his back fence had been dying for 2 summers straight, and it was driving him up the wall. I asked a few questions about sun and water, then told him it was almost certainly drainage plus too much shade off the neighbor's big tree. Walked him through a couple of cheap things he could try before spending real money on it. He listened like I was handing him the secret to a long and happy life. Kept nodding, kept turning to whoever was in earshot and saying, "See, this is what I mean. This kid actually knows things." Nobody had called my work knowing things in a very long time. In my own relationship, it was the thing to be softened, tucked away, apologized for at dinner parties. Here, it was the exact reason the man had decided he liked me. The food started coming out, big trays of it, everybody passing plates hand to hand down the length of the table. An older relative across from me, some uncle or great uncle, wanted to hear all about the trade, asked how a guy gets his own crew, how you price a job, whether the work dries up in winter. Real questions, the kind you ask when you actually respect what a person does instead of just tolerating it. I found myself talking about the work the way I used to before I learned to be embarrassed about it. Told him about the courtyard job that had gone sideways with the leaking water feature and how I chased that bad fitting for a week. He laughed in the right places, asked good follow-ups, treated a story about irrigation like it was worth hearing. Halfway through it hit me that this was the exact kind of talk Sloan trained me to shove down and replace with something cultured. Here it was, the thing making the whole table lean in. Nobody needed me to have opinions on wine. They wanted to know how things actually get built and fixed. Clara's little brother, some teenager, latched onto me partway through the night. Wanted to know if I could fix the string trimmer that kept jamming in their garage. We went and looked at it right there in the middle of the party. 10 minutes, a stuck spool, a little muttering under my breath, and the thing fired up and ran clean. Kid looked at me like I'd pulled a rabbit out of a hat. Wanted to know if he could come see how my crew works sometime. Told him sure, any Saturday he wants. His mom, Clara's mother, had been watching the whole repair from the kitchen window the entire time. A bit later, I was over by the back door grabbing another drink, and I caught her talking to Clara without either of them clocking that I was close enough to hear. She told Clara that this was the kind of man she'd always hoped her daughter would end up with someday. Steady. Handy. The type who fixes the problem in front of him instead of standing around complaining about it. Said it warm and plain, like she was just naming an obvious fact about the world. I stood there with my hand resting on the cooler lid and felt something split right open in my chest. Because across 2 full years, not one single person in Sloan's world had said a warm thing about me simply being around, and I'd known these people for the length of one dinner. Partway through the meal, somebody clinked a glass, and Roy stood up to say a few words about turning 60. Kept it short. Thanked his wife, thanked his kids, thanked the people who showed up. Then he pointed his glass at me, this guy he'd met 3 hours earlier, and thanked me for the tree and for sorting out that fence before he even asked twice. Whole table looked over and raised their drinks at me. I've been to plenty of parties where I stood against a wall waiting for the night to be over. Never once been toasted at one by a man I'd just met. The night kept going like that. Roy told me a bit about himself somewhere in there. Worked with his hands his whole life, some kind of tradesman before his knees gave out, and he moved to easier work. Said he could always tell within a minute or two which men actually did anything, and which ones just talked about it. Said I was clearly the first kind, and he said it like it was the highest thing a person could be. Somebody's grandmother told me I had a kind face. A cousin asked if I'd take a look at her patio when I had a free weekend, said she'd pay proper for it. I felt like a person there, not a project halfway through being renovated on somebody's schedule. By the time I started making noises about heading out, half the relatives had my number saved in their phones. An uncle wanted a quote for redoing his whole front yard. An aunt asked whether I took on the small jobs too. Said hers was nothing fancy. Roy walked me all the way out to my truck, shook my hand a second time, thanked me again for the olive tree, and told me to swing by whenever I felt like it. Called me son when he said it. Just tossed it out. Easy as anything. Drive safe, son, like the word cost him nothing at all. I sat in that truck in their driveway for a solid minute before I turned the key. 4 hours. It took a complete stranger 4 hours to hand me what my own girlfriend had held back for 2 full years. The plain, simple feeling of belonging at the table. The drive home was quiet. Kept turning it over, trying to figure out what Roy's family had that Sloane's supposedly didn't. Roy wasn't some soft, easygoing pushover who'd welcome anybody through the door. The man clearly had standards, you could feel it. He just measured people by whether they were decent and useful instead of by their paycheck and their shirt. Which meant the whole story I'd been told for 2 years didn't add up. If a hard, particular man like Roy could size me up and approve of me over 1 beer, then my dad is particular was never really about her dad at all. I didn't have the guts to finish that thought yet. Parked, went inside, let it sit. I didn't breathe a word of any of it to Sloane when I got in that night. She was already asleep, or doing a convincing impression of it. Figured that was the end of it. A nice night, and tomorrow it's back to the usual grind. It was very much not the end of it. A day or 2 on, the whole thing came apart. And it came apart over a single group chat photo. Clara had posted a handful of pictures from the party into her family's chat. One of them was me and Roy, his arm slung around my shoulder, both of us laughing at something I couldn't even tell you now. She'd captioned it something like, "Best last-minute save ever, Dad's already adopted him. Harmless, sweet even, if you're not sitting there looking to be wounded by it." Trouble is, somebody in that chat also happened to know Sloane. Small-town energy, one mutual acquaintance, and you know exactly how these things travel. The photo got forwarded straight to her within the day. And Sloane saw it. Saw the man she'd spent 2 years holding at arm's length from her own family, sitting at the head of somebody else's table, wrapped up under somebody else's father's arm. Dropped neatly into the one role she'd never once let me get anywhere near. She called me that evening, and I could tell from the way she said, "Hey," that it was going to be ugly. Opened with the accusation, naturally. Wanted to know why I was meeting families behind her back. Why some other man's dad had his arm around me in a photo going around. Whether there was something going on between me and Clara that I wasn't telling her. I kept my voice level the whole time. Reminded her I'd told her precisely where I was going and that she'd wave me off without so much as looking up from her screen. Reminded her it was a favor for a coworker and not one thing more than that. She had no interest in the facts. She'd called to be angry, and she was going to be angry no matter what I said. Then she said the thing that flipped the entire conversation for me. Told me it was so like a man to go hunting for validation from strangers. Called it toxic, straight out, no hesitation. Said I was making the whole night about my ego, that this was the exact kind of male entitlement she couldn't stand. Said a secure man wouldn't need some random family fawning over him to feel good about himself. Sit with that one for a second, the way my buddy would have told me to, months back. I'd spent 2 years reshaping myself piece by piece to qualify for her family. And the second another family simply took me exactly as I already was, that was the toxic thing in the room. My ego, my entitlement, my problem to fix. Something clicked into place then. Real quiet, no heat behind it at all. I stopped being hurt and just got clear-headed. Asked her one question. Why, after 2 years, had I still never met her parents? She rolled out the usual list without missing a single beat. The income, the clothes, the way I talk, her dad being particular, her mom being refined. All the old conditions, dusted off and stood back up in a neat little row. So I told her about Roy, told her the man never asked what I made in a year, never checked my shirt, never coached me on how to be more interesting once the food came out. The only thing Roy wanted to know was whether I actually liked the work I do with my days. And when I said yes, that was the whole test, and I'd passed it before the door even shut behind me. Then I said the part I'd been circling for 2 years without ever quite landing on it. Her parents had never once rejected me, because her parents had never actually known I existed in any real way. The bar was never theirs. The bar had always, the entire time, been hers. The income, the wardrobe, the manners, every last piece of it. That was Sloane's own embarrassment, wearing a costume and calling itself her family's standards. She'd been dressing up her shame as their expectations and handing me the bill to pay for it. The line went dead quiet on her end, and then, slow, I heard her work out that I was right. She started to push back and it just kinda dried up in her throat before it got anywhere. Because somewhere in that silence, she landed on the fact that she'd never really told her parents about me at all. Not properly, not the way you talk about somebody who actually matters to you. I'd been a secret she kept, even from the very people I was supposedly straining so hard to impress. 2 years of standards. 2 years that boiled all the way down to her deciding, over and over again, whether she was too embarrassed to put me in front of them. And landing on yes, every single time. When that finally hit her, the whole tone flipped inside a breath. The anger drained right out and a scramble rushed in to take its place. All at once she wanted to fix it. Said she'd talk to her parents that very week, no more putting it off. Said she'd set up a dinner, a real one, and we'd finally make the whole thing happen. Said she was sorry, that she'd been stressed the entire time, that she hadn't seen how it all looked from where I was standing. Offered to introduce me that coming weekend, like the calendar had somehow been the holdup all along. A year earlier, I'd have jumped at it with both feet and thanked her for the chance. Would have gone shopping again, crammed a few more topics, dug the itchy jacket out of the closet and ironed it flat. But I'd sat at Roy's table. I knew now, right down in my body, what it's supposed to feel like when a family opens the door and lets you all the way in. It isn't supposed to feel like passing an inspection you never get the results back on. It's supposed to feel like a firm handshake and a cold beer and a man leaning over to ask what you'd do about his dying grass. So I told her no. Not shouting, not cruel about it, just finished. Told her I'd spent 2 years auditioning for a family I'd never even met once. And a stranger's father had figured out I was worth a chair at the table inside a single evening. The problem was never that I wasn't ready, I said. The problem was that she was never, not for one day, actually proud. You don't patch a hole like that with a weekend dinner and a fresh round of apologies. We didn't drag it out into some drawn-out war over the phone. No screaming, no thrown plates, no big cinematic blow-up on anybody's front lawn. I gathered up the handful of things I still kept at her place, left the itchy jacket hanging in the closet where it always belonged, and drove home. She texted on and off across the next week, some of it apology, some of it blame, and one long message about how I'd never given her enough security to feel proud of me in the first place. I read that one through twice, then set the phone face down on the counter. 2 trucks, a steady book of clients, a trade I'm genuinely good at, money in the bank every single week without fail. If that isn't enough to make a person proud of a man, the shortage was never sitting on my side of the table. Told my buddy about all of it a few days later, same spot where he'd first called it. He didn't do the whole "I told you so" routine, to his credit. Just nodded slow and said the part that stuck with me. Said, a woman who's actually proud of you doesn't make you audition for the role of her boyfriend 2 years in. She shows you off the first chance she gets, flaws and dirty boots and all. Said the ones who keep you hidden and keep handing you a longer list of fixes aren't building toward anything. They're just deciding, real slow, whether you're good enough to be seen with, and making it your job to change their mind. I'd spent 2 years trying to change a mind that was never going to land on yes. Bought him lunch for calling it a year before I could hear it. The week that followed was strange, honestly. Kept reaching for my phone to tell Sloan about my day out of pure habit, then remembering there was nothing there anymore. But underneath that mostly was this flat, quiet relief. No more homework, no more moving shelf, no more softening what I do so it fits in her mouth easier. Here's the part that still pulls a grin out of me every time. Roughly 2 weeks after all of it, my phone rang one evening. It was Roy. His back fence grass was still hanging on by a thread, and the quick tips from the party hadn't fully turned it around. Wanted to know if I'd come out and take a proper look at the drainage under there. And then, before I could even get an answer out, he tacked on that I should plan to stay for dinner while I was at it. Said the wife was cooking too much food again, same as she always does, and there'd be more than enough to go around. So I drove back out to that regular house on that regular street, dug into the fence line, found the low spot where the water was pooling and quietly rotting the roots out, laid out a real plan to bring the whole strip back green by next summer. Then I washed up at the outside tap and sat down at the table, same seat as the first time, right next to Roy. His wife pushed a loaded plate in front of me before I could reach for a single thing. The teenager came straight over to prove the trimmer was still running strong. Nobody at that table needed me more established, or better dressed, or armed with clever topics for the lulz. All they ever needed was for me to show up, and I did. I look at those 2 years pretty differently now that I'm standing on the other side of them. I used to think I was failing some test I could never quite make out the edges of. Turns out there was no test to fail in the first place. There was just a woman ashamed of the honest thing I do for a living, and a man who respected me right down to the ground for that exact same thing. What gets me most, looking back, is how normal she made all of it feel while it was happening. The moving conditions, the softened introductions, the 2 mystery parents up on their shelf. Piece by piece, it seemed reasonable enough that I kept signing up for the next round. It only looks insane laid out end to end like this, all at once. 2 years, 1 obstacle course, 0 handshakes with the people I was training so hard to impress. And a stranger's dad clearing me over a single beer just by asking whether I liked my own life. I ended up taking that uncle's front yard job, by the way, and the cousin's patio after it. Clara's family more or less became clients and something close to friends in the same stretch. The teenager did come out on a Saturday to see how the crew runs. Good kid, asks 100 questions. Sloan and I haven't spoken since the calls tapered off. Last I heard through the mutual acquaintance, she was telling people I wasn't ready for the commitment, which, sure, whatever helps. I know exactly what I wasn't ready for, and it wasn't commitment. It was spending a 3rd year auditioning for a part she was never going to cast me in. Sloan wanted me to meet her standards before I was ever allowed to meet her parents. She'd have been a whole lot better off worrying about whether she was ever going to meet mine. Anyway, Roy's grass is filling back in now, thick and green all along the fence line. He texts me photos of it like a proud father showing off a kid's report card. Had me back for dinner twice more since the repair. And neither time did anybody ask me to be anything other than the guy who showed up. Funny how that all shook out in the end.